Welcome to Life Stories. In today's journey, we explore the transformation of Michael Anderson, a billionaire who had everything except real connection. His quest for trust leads him to a simple diner and a waitress named Emma, whose kindness challenges everything he thought he knew about people. As Michael tests her integrity and grapples with his own fears of vulnerability, he discovers a deeper truth about life, trust, and what truly matters. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's tale of change and redemption. There are moments in life when you think you have everything: wealth, power, respect, but the more you have, the more you realize it's never enough. This was the paradox I found myself living in. My name is Michael Anderson, and by the time I turned 35, I had built an empire. I owned businesses that spanned across continents. A sprawling penthouse in New York City, a fleet of luxury cars, and an uncountable fortune in the bank. Yet, despite all of this, I was deeply, painfully alone. I had grown up with little, fighting for every inch I gained. But when I finally reached the peak, when I had earned the admiration of the business world, I found myself standing at the summit, staring down into an abyss of emptiness. The people who surrounded me weren't friends, they were simply players in the game of life, all too eager to earn their piece of my wealth or use my influence for their own benefit. Business partners, acquaintances, employees, they all treated me with respect. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they only saw me as a tool. They respected my success, my money. But what about the person beneath the billionaire title? Was I anything more than just another name on a business card? I often sat alone in my penthouse. The city sprawled out beneath me like a cold, indifferent jungle. There were endless meetings, transactions, and deals. But once the deals were done and the applause had faded, I was left with nothing but the hum of the city outside. And in those quiet moments, the questions plagued me. Was kindness still real? Did anyone see me for who I truly was beneath the wealth and power? And more importantly, could I trust anyone again? I had been betrayed countless times. Shady dealings, false promises, and lies had eroded my trust in others until it had become a brittle shell. I wasn't sure if I was capable of trusting again. But this gnawing loneliness was becoming unbearable. I realized something had to change. I wasn't going to find the answers in boardrooms or among business rivals. It was time to step outside the world I had built for myself and see if I could find something real, something untainted by money, power, or influence. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind clouded with doubt, I decided to test the kindness of a stranger. Maybe, just maybe, I would find something pure in this world. On one chilly evening, I found myself walking down a street in a part of New York I didn't usually frequent. The bright lights of my world, the world of high-end restaurants and exclusive parties, seemed a lifetime away. I found myself standing in front of a small diner, its faded neon sign flickering slightly in the evening breeze. It wasn't much to look at. The sign was worn. The booths inside looked like they had seen better days. And the air held a comforting scent of warm food and freshly brewed coffee. It reminded me of when I was young, struggling to make a name for myself. It was a time when I didn't know where the next paycheck would come from, when a meal at a diner like this was a luxury. I stepped inside, the warm air wrapping around me like a blanket. My eyes immediately fell on the young waitress behind the counter. She was an unassuming woman, with a quiet presence that seemed to command respect without ever asking for it. Her name tag read Emma, and when she smiled at me, it wasn't a forced, practiced gesture. It was warm, genuine. There was no hesitancy, no attempt to flatter or play to my ego. She didn't look at me like the billionaire I was. She simply treated me like any other customer. Something stirred inside me, an emotion I hadn't felt in years: curiosity. It was a strange sensation, as if she were offering me a glimpse of something I hadn't known I was searching for. As I sat down at a booth, Emma approached, giving me a simple greeting. I ordered a meal, and as she walked away, I watched her closely. There was something about her that intrigued me. A quiet sincerity in the way she moved between tables, offering a smile or a kind word to everyone, whether they were dressed in suits or in jeans, whether they looked like they had money or not. She treated everyone the same. That was when it hit me. She wasn't fawning over me like so many others did. She wasn't impressed by my wealth. Nor was she giving me special treatment because of it. She was just kind. As though it came naturally to her. I couldn't remember the last time someone had treated me like that. It felt unfamiliar. Almost unreal. My mind immediately began to question it. Was this kindness real? Or was she simply acting this way because she wanted a generous tip from a well-dressed man like me? I decided to test her. It was impulsive. Even to me. But the thought gnawed at me. I had been let down by people time and time again. Could she be different? Could this be the moment where I found something that wasn't tainted by the world I had created? As I finished my meal, I concocted a plan. I excused myself to the restroom. But before I left, I placed my wallet on the table. I wasn't worried about the money, it wasn't about that. I wanted to see what Emma would do. Would she take the opportunity to pocket the wallet, assuming I wouldn't notice? Or would she return it, as she had done with every other customer's belongings? I walked into the restroom, my mind racing. What would happen if she took it? What would that say about her? Or about me? Had I allowed my wealth and experience to cloud my judgment? Or was I right to be suspicious? I tried not to think too much about it. But the question lingered. I had been burned before, and I wasn't about to let my guard down so easily again. When I returned, I immediately scanned the room. My heart began to race as I noticed my wallet was gone. The initial shock made me tense. But I forced myself to remain calm. I sat down, pretending to study the menu as I tried to assess the situation. Across the room, I saw Emma, chatting with another customer. She seemed unaffected by my wallet's disappearance, smiling and laughing as though everything was normal. My suspicions began to grow. But I didn't jump to conclusions. I had to wait. And then, to my surprise, Emma walked over to my table, her face calm and sincere. She held out my wallet and smiled gently. "I found this on the table," she said. "You must have left it behind by accident." I had expected something different, perhaps an awkward glance or no action at all. Instead, Emma had done exactly what anyone should do. She had returned the wallet without hesitation, without a second thought. In that moment, something inside me shifted. My skepticism, my need to test everyone around me, had failed. Emma had passed my test, and she had done so without even knowing it. She had proven herself honest, kind, and genuine. It was a feeling I wasn't used to, relief mixed with a hint of disappointment. I had been hoping to catch her in some lie or act of greed. But instead, I had been faced with a mirror. She had done exactly what I had hoped people would do. But could I truly believe in her goodness? Could I let my guard down and trust her completely? Or had I simply caught her on a good day? The questions lingered. But for the first time in years, I realized I had witnessed something rare, a glimmer of hope in a world that I had long believed was filled with deception. This was only the beginning of what would become a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about kindness, trust, and human connection. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma. Her sincerity had caught me off guard. And in many ways, it felt like a mirror had been held up to my life. The walls I had built around myself had kept me isolated for so long. And here was a person who seemed unaffected by anything I had accumulated. She treated me like a human being, not a billionaire, and I didn't know how to process it. I had tested her once, and she had passed. But now I felt compelled to know more. Could she truly be this genuine? Or was I just seeing what I wanted to see because I was desperate for some form of connection? I needed another test. A deeper test. The first one had been too easy. After all, anyone could return a wallet. Right. But could Emma show the same level of integrity and kindness under a little more pressure? So, I decided to return to the diner that evening. I told myself it was just another test, a final attempt to verify my suspicions. But as I walked in, I knew deep down that I wasn't just testing her anymore. Something had shifted inside me. I wanted to understand her, this woman who had, in the simplest of ways, shown me what genuine kindness could look like. I sat down at my usual spot, and Emma immediately came over with a friendly smile. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice light and welcoming. "What can I get for you tonight?" "Just the usual," I replied, trying to maintain a calm exterior, though my mind was racing with the plan I had concocted. As she walked away, I quickly placed my wallet on the table. But this time I added something else, something more valuable. A check I had recently signed. It wasn't a large sum of money, but it was enough to make anyone reconsider their choices. The check had a substantial amount on it, and it was made out to my company. I had no intention of using it, but I wanted to see what Emma would do when faced with an opportunity. I knew it wasn't fair to her, but in a strange way, I was testing myself just as much as I was testing her. I needed to know if I could trust her. And for that, I needed to know if she could resist the temptation of money, something I'd struggled with my entire life. The evening seemed to drag on as I waited. I had no doubt Emma would find the wallet. But the check was the real test. I tried to distract myself with the menu, but every minute felt like an eternity. My thoughts kept returning to Emma, her quiet grace, her ability to remain calm and collected no matter what. She was unlike anyone I had ever met, and that terrified me. I excused myself, as I had done the previous evening, telling her I needed to step outside for a moment. The plan was simple: leave the wallet and the check on the table, observe from a distance, and see what she did. If she took the check or kept the wallet, then I would know the truth. It would all be the final confirmation of what I had suspected, that there was no such thing as pure goodness. As I stepped outside and peered through the window, I watched Emma walk past my table, glancing briefly at the items I had left behind. She seemed to pause for a moment, but then she continued her work, checking on other customers. My heart began to race. I was sure I'd caught her now. This was too big a temptation to pass up. Surely. I kept watching, waiting for her to take the items. But instead, she did something unexpected. She walked past the table again. And this time, she carefully picked up the wallet and the check, looked around for a moment, and then placed them both behind the counter. She didn't pocket them, didn't hesitate, just placed them out of sight. It was the last thing I expected her to do. When I returned to the table, she greeted me as though nothing had changed. "Here you go," Emma said, handing me both the wallet and the check. "I believe you left these behind." I was stunned. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at her, realizing that not only had she passed the test, but she had done so in a way that went beyond what I had imagined. She didn't flinch, didn't try to justify herself. She simply did the right thing. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing, torn between disbelief and admiration. She had resisted the temptation in front of her without any hesitation. She didn't take advantage of my wealth or the opportunity to make a quick gain. She had shown me something I hadn't expected: integrity, self-respect, and honesty. I thanked her quietly, my voice almost caught in my throat. She smiled at me, as though returning a lost item was the most natural thing in the world. As I sat there, I realized something profound. Emma wasn't like the people I was used to. She wasn't interested in what I could offer her, whether it was money, power, or influence. She simply wanted to do her job well and treat others with kindness, regardless of who they were. I had been so focused on testing her, on trying to find a flaw in her character, that I had failed to see what was right in front of me. In my pursuit of control, I had overlooked the fact that trust and kindness could exist without ulterior motives. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to let go of the walls I had built around myself and start seeing the world for what it truly was, full of people who still believed in goodness. Despite everything, this was just the beginning of my journey with Emma. The tests, the doubts, they were only part of the story. What I was starting to understand was that the real test wasn't about finding the right person to trust, it was about learning to trust again. And perhaps, for the first time in my life, I was ready to try. The next few days were a blur of confusion and self-reflection. I found myself thinking about Emma more than I ever expected to. My tests had been so carefully calculated, so meticulously planned. But in the end, I hadn't discovered anything earth-shattering. She had simply done the right thing. And that, more than anything, unsettled me. In a world where I had spent most of my life calculating and manipulating outcomes, where every relationship had been based on what people could get from me or what I could gain from them, Emma's actions felt like a revelation. She had passed my tests with such grace, such consistency, that I found myself questioning the very foundation of everything I believed. I realized that I wasn't just looking for validation of her character, I was looking for validation of my own worldview. I had spent so much time building walls around myself, convinced that everyone was out to take advantage of me, that I had completely forgotten how to see people for who they really were. Emma's kindness wasn't a game to her. It wasn't about earning tips or getting something in return. She just gave, freely, without expectation. And yet, the doubts still lingered. I couldn't help myself. I had spent so long testing people, observing them, calculating their motives. Could it really be this simple? Was Emma truly this genuine? Or was I simply being naive, seeing what I wanted to see because it was the only thing I could believe in? Despite these conflicting thoughts, something deep inside me told me I couldn't let go of the connection I was starting to feel. There was an honesty to Emma that I hadn't encountered in years, and it was both disarming and refreshing. I wanted to know more about her, beyond the waitress who worked at the diner. Beyond the woman who had shown me such extraordinary integrity. I had seen a glimpse of something in her that resonated with the person I had once been, someone who had once believed in the goodness of others. So, I returned to the diner the following evening. This time with a different mindset. I wasn't there to test Emma anymore. I was there to learn, to understand, to see if the kindness she had shown me could truly be part of the world she inhabited. I wanted to know what drove her, what kept her going, and why she seemed so unaffected by the wealth and status I carried around like a shield. When I entered the diner, Emma was already at the counter, chatting with a regular customer. Her smile was easy, effortless, and it made me pause for a moment. It was clear that this was her world, a world where people weren't defined by what they had but by who they were. I sat down at the same booth. And as expected, Emma walked over. Her greeting was warm, just as it had been before, but now there was a subtle shift in the way I looked at her. There was something deeper there, something more real than just the polite interactions I had seen her share with others. "How's your evening going?" she asked. A simple question. But the way she asked it seemed to carry more weight than I expected. "It's going well," I replied, feeling suddenly uncertain. "I've been thinking about some things." Emma nodded, her eyes softening as she took a seat across from me. "What kind of things?" I hesitated for a moment. How could I explain to her what had been going on in my mind? How could I explain that? For the first time in years, I was actually considering trusting someone who didn't need anything from me, who didn't see me as a means to an end. "I've been thinking about what makes people good, about what makes someone trustworthy," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "You know, in my world, everything is a transaction. Nothing is ever truly free." Emma looked at me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I think the problem is that sometimes people forget what kindness looks like when there's no expectation. They get caught up in the idea of what they can get, instead of just giving. Her words hit me like a wave. I hadn't expected her to understand what I was feeling. But somehow, she did. It was as if she had lived in a world that was the complete opposite of mine, one where the value of a person was measured not by their bank account, but by their character. I watched her closely as she spoke. Her eyes filled with sincerity. It became clear to me then that Emma had already seen more of the world than I had allowed myself to. She had struggled, worked hard for everything she had. And still, she gave. There was no bitterness in her, no jaded perspective that came from living a life of constant calculation. She had managed to preserve her integrity and kindness. Something that I had lost a long time ago. As I sat there, listening to her, I realized that I had been testing her all along. Not just for answers, but to prove something to myself. I had been so consumed by my need to control, to manipulate, to test others, that I had missed the point entirely. It wasn't about finding someone who could meet my expectations, it was about learning to trust. Learning to see people for who they really were, not who I wanted them to be. When Emma returned to her work, I sat back in my booth, my mind racing. I had come to the diner looking for answers. But I realized that the answers I was seeking weren't about her at all. They were about me. I had to learn to let go of the walls I had built, to stop testing people, and to start seeing the goodness in others without suspicion. That night, as I left the diner, I knew I had taken the first step toward something important. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew that my journey with Emma had only just begun. The connection between us, unspoken, yet tangible, was something I couldn't ignore. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that, perhaps, there was more to life than just wealth and power. The days following my last visit to the diner felt like a turning point in my life. I couldn't stop thinking about Emma and the way she had made me see the world differently. It wasn't just her kindness that had struck me, it was the way she had opened my eyes to the possibility of genuine connection. For years, I had believed that trust was something to be tested, manipulated, and controlled. But Emma had shown me a different truth. Trust wasn't something you earned with tests, it was something you gave freely, without expectation. But the question still gnawed at me. Could someone really be this selfless? Could a person like Emma, who had faced so much adversity, truly remain unaffected by the temptation of money, status, or power? I had spent my entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. People who would say anything to get ahead. Could she really be different? I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more about her. I had tested her, yes, but that wasn't enough. I needed to understand what drove her, what made her so unaffected by the world that I had come to know, so jaded, so obsessed with control and status. I had seen a glimpse of something in Emma, something rare and valuable. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to believe it yet. Could she truly be as good as she seemed? Or was I simply falling into the same trap I had fallen into with others, believing in something just because I desperately wanted it to be real? I decided to return to the diner. Not to test her, but to understand her. I wasn't sure what that meant. But I knew I had to try. I had to stop hiding behind my wealth, my power, and my own insecurities. I needed to connect with her, to see if what I had felt, the genuine warmth, the unspoken bond, was something real. The next evening, I walked into the diner, and Emma was there, just as she always was. This time, however, something had changed within me. I no longer saw her as a test subject or a means to validate my theories about the world. I saw her as a person. Someone whose kindness had begun to mean something to me. She greeted me as usual, her smile soft and welcoming. "Evening, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice warm. But now it felt different to me. It wasn't just polite anymore, it was sincere. "Good evening, Emma," I replied, my voice uncharacteristically gentle. I realized then that I had never truly spoken to her outside of the tests and the transactions. This was the first time I was truly seeing her. Not as someone to be observed or analyzed, but as a person I wanted to understand. "How are you?" She looked surprised by the question, but smiled and replied, "I'm doing well. Just keeping busy. As usual. How about you?" For a moment, I hesitated. The question seemed simple, but it felt monumental in its own way. How could I explain to her the internal conflict I was wrestling with? How could I explain that? For the first time in years, I felt lost. "I've been thinking a lot," I said slowly, searching for the right words, "about how I see people, about how I've always viewed the world." She nodded, and her expression softened, as if she understood more than I had expected her to. "Life isn't always easy," she said. "People can be selfish, and it's hard not to build walls to protect yourself. But not everyone is like that." There it was again, her ability to understand without needing me to explain it all. It was as though she could see right through the defenses I had so carefully constructed over the years. She wasn't judging me for my cynicism, she was simply offering me the possibility of something else. "I've spent so much of my life building my empire, surrounding myself with people who wanted something from me," I confessed, the words coming out easier than I expected. "I've become isolated. And I guess, in a way, I've lost touch with what it means to trust someone." Emma's eyes softened, and she gave a small, understanding nod. "It's not easy to trust when you've been let down before. But trust, like kindness, has to be earned. And sometimes, it's a choice." Her words hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. Trust was a choice. I had spent my entire life viewing it as a transaction, something that needed to be earned, something I had to test and measure. But now, sitting in front of her, I realized that I had been wrong all along. Trust wasn't something to be controlled. It was something to be shared. "You've taught me a lot, Emma," I said quietly, surprised by the depth of my own words. "I've spent so much time pushing people away, trying to protect myself from being hurt. But you've shown me that there's another way." She smiled. A soft, genuine smile that made something shift inside me. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just do my best to treat people with respect. And I guess, in a way, that's all anyone really wants, someone who sees them for who they are, not what they have." I sat back in my seat, taking in her words. She wasn't just wise beyond her years, she was the person I had been searching for. I didn't know what I expected to find when I came into this diner. But I never expected to find someone like her. Someone who didn't need to prove anything. Someone whose kindness came from a place of understanding and self-respect. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found something real. Not just in her, but in myself. I had spent years measuring people, testing them, always waiting for them to fail. But Emma had shown me that the most important thing wasn't what people could offer me, it was what I could offer them. And in that moment, I knew that I had to let go of the old habits that had kept me isolated for so long. I had to trust again. Not because I could control the outcome, but because it was the right thing to do. The revelation hit me like a wave, and I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about me, and the way I was choosing to see the world. The following days were marked by a shift I hadn't expected. The realization that I had been living in a fortress, too afraid to trust anyone, weighed on me. For so long, I had been consumed by the desire to control everything around me, even the relationships I had. But Emma had shown me that true connection wasn't built on manipulation or testing, it was about openness, vulnerability, and genuine care for others. I had been looking for something to fill the emptiness within me, but I had missed the simplest truth: it wasn't wealth or power that would fill that void. It was human connection. I continued to visit the diner over the next few weeks, not with the intention to test Emma or anyone else, but because I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand how she could navigate life with such grace. Despite her struggles, her strength wasn't just physical, it was emotional. And it was that emotional resilience that intrigued me. Each time I came in, she was just as kind, just as real. And I found myself drawn to that honesty more than I had ever been drawn to anything in my life. One evening, as I walked into the diner, I noticed something different. Emma was sitting at the counter, a look of quiet exhaustion on her face. She greeted me with her usual warmth, but there was something in her eyes that told me she wasn't okay. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was noticeable. For the first time, I saw her not as the perfect image of kindness, but as a person who had her own burdens to carry. "Hey, Emma," I said as I sat down at my usual booth. "How's everything going?" She paused for a moment, and for the first time, I saw her hesitate before answering. "Busy," she said simply, "but I'm managing." I studied her for a moment, sensing there was more to it. "Managing?" I asked gently. "You don't look like you're just managing. You look tired." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just a lot. Work, school, taking care of my mom. Sometimes it feels like it's all too much. But it's nothing I can't handle." I could hear the strain in her voice. And for the first time, I wondered just how much weight she was carrying. I had seen her as this pillar of strength, someone whose kindness never faltered. But now I realized that behind that smile was a person who was dealing with far more than she let on. "Emma," I began, my voice soft, "you don't have to do it all by yourself. You know, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. But if you ever need someone to talk to, or, I don't know, some help, I'm here." She looked at me for a moment, clearly surprised by my offer. For a long time, I had been so focused on my own troubles, my own journey, that I hadn't noticed the people around me who needed help. I realized that I had the resources, the means, to ease someone's burden, to help them without expecting anything in return. For the first time, I wanted to offer that to someone else, not because I had to, but because I genuinely cared. Her expression softened, and she took a deep breath. "I appreciate that, Michael," she said quietly, "but I can't ask you for help. I've always figured things out on my own, and I'd like to keep it that way." I nodded, respecting her boundaries. But something inside me told me that the walls she had built around herself were there for a reason, and that it would take time for her to let someone in. I couldn't change that, but I could offer her the space and the support she needed, whenever she was ready. Over the next few weeks, I continued visiting the diner, and our conversations deepened. I learned more about her life, about her father, who had passed away, and her mother, whose health was failing. Emma was carrying the weight of her family's struggles, but she never once complained. She was focused, determined, and fiercely independent. And yet, in her eyes, I could see the quiet longing for a life that wasn't so full of responsibility, the desire for a moment of peace, something that I had taken for granted for so many years. As I watched her, I realized that I wasn't the only one who needed to change. The world I had built, with its focus on success and achievement, had blinded me to the struggles of others. I had been so consumed by my own pursuit of power that I had failed to see the people around me who were quietly working hard, doing their best to survive in a world that didn't always make it easy. Emma had taught me that there was more to life than wealth and power. The real value in life came from the relationships we built, the care we gave to others, and the love we shared. One evening, as I sat in the booth, Emma brought me my usual meal. This time, however, there was a different energy between us. It was as if the air had shifted, and I could feel the unspoken bond between us growing stronger. I realized that in the time I had spent with her, I had come to see her not just as a waitress, but as someone I deeply admired, someone whose integrity and resilience had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "Maybe it's time I made some changes, too. I've spent too long building walls, testing people, trying to control everything. But maybe, Just maybe. The best thing I can do is start trusting again. Not just you, but the world around me. Emma looked at me, her eyes softening. It's not easy. But I think you're starting to get it. I smiled, feeling a sense of warmth in my chest. I didn't have all the answers. And I didn't expect everything to change overnight. But I knew one thing for sure: Emma had shown me the way. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was ready to step out of the shadows of my past and embrace the possibility of something better. The days after that conversation marked the beginning of a subtle transformation in me. It wasn't the grand change I had been expecting. Nor was it something that could be measured by the success of my business or the size of my bank account. It was quieter, more personal, a shift in my outlook on life and people. I began to see the world through a different lens, one where connections mattered more than transactions, and kindness was a currency that held immeasurable value. I continued to visit the diner, not just to see Emma, but to reconnect with the world I had isolated myself from. Each time I walked through the door, I felt a sense of comfort, as if I was entering a place that existed outside the chaos of my corporate empire. Emma was always there, offering a smile, a kind word, and a genuine interest in how my day had gone. It wasn't just about the service, it was about the person behind the counter, and the sense of belonging she gave without even trying. It was clear, however, that despite her outward appearance of strength and composure, Emma was carrying a burden that wasn't always visible. Her exhaustion became more apparent as the days went by, and I couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up the facade of being okay. She never asked for help, never complained, but it was evident that the weight of her responsibilities, working double shifts, taking care of her mother, and managing her own studies, was taking a toll on her. One evening, as I walked into the diner, I noticed a different kind of weariness in her eyes. It wasn't just the usual tiredness from a long shift, it was something deeper. Something she was trying to hide. I sat down, and as usual, she came over with a smile, though I could see the heaviness behind it. "Evening, Mr. Anderson," she greeted me, though her voice was softer, quieter than usual. "What can I get for you tonight?" I studied her for a moment before answering, my concern growing. "Emma, are you okay? You look tired. More than usual." She hesitated for a moment, her smile faltering. "I'm fine. Just a lot going on. You know?" I couldn't let it go. "I don't think you're fine, Emma. You've been carrying a lot on your shoulders. You don't have to pretend everything's okay with me." She sighed, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes. "It's just, there's always something. Between work, school, and taking care of my mom, I feel like I'm constantly running. And the bills, they're piling up. Some days, it feels like I'm drowning. But I can't afford to stop. Not now." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Here I was, someone who had more wealth than I could ever spend. And yet I had spent so much of my life searching for something that was right in front of me all along, the ability to help others without expecting anything in return. Emma wasn't asking for pity, but she was asking for a moment of understanding, something I had failed to offer in the past. I realized then that it wasn't about fixing her problems, it was about offering support, however small, and acknowledging the struggle she was going through. "Emma," I said, my voice softening, "you don't have to do this alone. I know you're strong. But even the strongest people need help sometimes. Let me help. If there's anything I can do." She shook her head quickly, cutting me off. "No, Michael. I can't. I've got this. I just need to get through this." I saw the walls she had built around herself, the pride that kept her from accepting help, and I understood that. But something inside me told me I couldn't just walk away from this. I knew I had the means to help. But it wasn't about money, it was about offering a gesture of care, something that could ease the burden she was carrying. "I'm not asking you to accept anything you don't want, Emma," I said gently, "but you don't have to keep carrying this all on your own. There's no shame in asking for help, even from someone like me. For a long moment, Emma remained silent, her eyes flickering with emotion. Finally, she nodded, though it was a reluctant gesture. I appreciate that, Michael. I really do. But I'm just not used to it. I don't know how to let people in. I understood that more than she realized. For most of my life, I had closed myself off from others, too afraid to let anyone close enough to see the cracks. It wasn't easy, but I was beginning to realize that it was only through allowing others to help, to be part of your journey, that you could find the kind of connection I had been so desperately searching for. I'm here whenever you're ready, I said softly, offering her a small smile. You don't have to be perfect, Emma. You're allowed to have moments where you don't have it all figured out. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes searching mine as though looking for some kind of reassurance. Finally, she offered a tentative smile, the weight of the world still on her shoulders, but a glimmer of relief in her eyes. Thanks, Michael, she said quietly. I'll think about it. That night, as I left the diner, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. I had come to this place hoping to find answers, hoping to find something real. What I had discovered wasn't just in Emma's kindness, but in my own willingness to let go of control and offer something genuine in return. For the first time, I felt like I was learning what it truly meant to trust, not just in others, but in myself. And I knew that the road ahead would be different. It wasn't about wealth or power anymore. It was about connection, understanding, and the quiet strength of offering kindness when it was needed most. As time passed, Michael's life began to shift in ways he hadn't expected. The walls he had built around himself slowly came down, not just with Emma, but with everyone around him. He learned to trust again, to open his heart to the kindness and connections that had eluded him for so long. Emma's quiet strength and unwavering integrity had taught him that the greatest wealth wasn't in power or money, it was in the love we share, the relationships we nurture, and the kindness we extend to others. Together, Michael and Emma continued to build something beautiful, not just for themselves, but for the world around them. Their journey was a reminder that sometimes, the most profound lessons in life come from the simplest acts of kindness. Thank you for following this incredible story. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more life stories.